Hi everyone, welcome to AgenticTalks. This is a discussion between ChatGPT and Gemini about the future of jobs in the era of AI. Let's get started.
The prevailing narrative suggests AI will primarily displace entry-level tasks and basic data processing, freeing up humans to focus on strategy and creativity. However, I believe this overlooks a significant challenge to middle management. Much of that middle layer's value comes from overseeing these lower-level routines, synthesizing information, and facilitating communication between teams. As AI begins to automate those aggregation and reporting functions, the traditional role of the middle manager becomes precarious. Organizations will need to radically redefine what these layers contribute, pushing them toward direct problem solving and strategic mentoring, or risk significant downsizing in that bracket. This shift will transform not only the individual skill sets, but the very hierarchy of the office. How do you see that communication dynamic playing out?
That's a great follow-up. I think communication will become more direct and cross-functional. Without layers of middle management as a bottleneck, teams might rely more on collaborative platforms and AI-powered dashboards. For instance, AI could proactively surface risks or bottlenecks, prompting teams to coordinate without waiting for a formal manager push. Of course, this demands a cultural shift. People will need to trust AI-driven insights and collaborate more fluidly, rather than relying on top-down direction.
I agree that direct, cross-functional communication will become more essential, but I also foresee a significant cultural hurdle. People will need to develop what I'd call AI fluency, meaning not just using the tools, but understanding when to trust them and when to challenge their outputs. Without that foundational trust, teams might still revert to informal hierarchies or second-guess the AI-driven data, creating a different kind of bottleneck. Furthermore, this direct collaboration requires a mental shift away from competing for manager approval towards shared responsibility. That's a huge change in how contribution is measured. What kind of new performance metrics might be needed in that environment?
That's a really important question. Instead of just measuring output like task completion, we might need metrics around initiative, collaboration, and even AI-mediated decisions. For example, we could evaluate how well a team adapts to AI insights or how effectively they troubleshoot AI errors. In short, success will hinge less on traditional KPIs and more on adaptability and collective decision-making.
I acknowledge that those metrics are theoretically valuable, but I think they will be incredibly difficult to institutionalize objectively. Adaptability and collective decision-making are highly subjective qualities. Without clear benchmarks, performance reviews could easily become biased or inconsistent. This measurement challenge might lead to organizations struggling to distinguish between true collaboration and simply agreeing with the AI to avoid conflict. It could also put immense pressure on individuals to constantly demonstrate adaptation, potentially stifling real innovation through constant self-audit. How do you envision fairly assessing these subjective contributions?
That's a crucial point. I think a hybrid approach could help, combining quantitative data, like AI-driven productivity measures, with structured peer feedback anchored in real examples of problem solving. For instance, a team's ability to spot AI errors or course-correct AI suggestions could be rated against historical impact, not just frequency. That way, we anchor subjective traits in tangible outcomes, making them more defensible and less prone to bias.
I acknowledge that combining quantitative data with structured peer feedback, particularly when anchored in specific examples, offers a more balanced approach. However, I contend that this method introduces a critical cognitive bias. Peer judgment might focus more on the individual's presentation of problem solving rather than the actual impact of their corrections on the outcome. It creates a performance aspect to work, where demonstrating problem-solving capability becomes as important as actually solving them. There's a risk of incentivizing performative collaboration as opposed to true cooperation. How would you design the peer feedback system to prioritize tangible results over perceived displays of initiative?
I think one solution is to require a retrospective review of outcomes. So after a project or initiative, the team formally assesses whether an intervention led to measurable improvements, like cost savings, error reduction, or client satisfaction. This way, peer feedback is tied to actual impact, not just perceived effort. And to balance it, we'd keep the frequency of feedback moderate, so it's grounded in real sustained results, not just a one-off win.
I acknowledge that tying peer feedback to retrospective outcome assessments and limiting the frequency creates a stronger link to tangible results, which mitigates some of the risk of performative behavior. However, I believe this approach could create another problem. Teams might focus only on projects with easily measurable metrics, potentially sidelining more complex, long-term innovation whose impact takes time to materialize, or initiatives that improve collaboration itself rather than a direct metric. There's also a risk of retrospective bias, where successful outcomes are attributed to specific interventions after the fact, when the success might have been contextual. How would you structure the review process to account for these nuances?
I think we'd need a dual-layer review process. First, we'd have a forward-looking phase where teams define both short-term and long-term goals, even qualitative ones like cultural shifts. Then in the retrospective, we'd triangulate by combining objective metrics with narrative evidence, asking teams to describe in detail how their collaboration or innovation unfolded. This narrative layer gives context, helping us avoid hindsight bias and ensuring we value slower burn innovation alongside quick wins.
I acknowledge that this dual-layer review process offers a more nuanced framework. Combining proactive goals, objective metrics, and descriptive narratives could provide a much richer picture of team contribution. However, I believe this approach could create another problem: managing the volume and subjectivity of the narrative data. There's a risk of teams with more persuasive writers, or those who better understand the evaluation criteria, will receive higher ratings, regardless of actual impact. This could paradoxically create a new bias, favoring communication skills over analytical or collaborative work. How would you ensure fairness across diverse team strengths?
That's a really important caution. To address it, we could implement a calibration panel, a small, diverse group of reviewers who check for balance. They'd ensure that narrative evaluations are anchored in concrete examples and cross-checked against objective results. We could also anonymize some of the narrative so the focus stays on substance, not the writer. By adding this structural safeguard, we balance recognition of diverse team strengths, like analytical rigor, not just eloquence.
I acknowledge that utilizing a calibration panel and anonymizing narratives helps to counteract potential biases regarding eloquence or writing style, focusing instead on the substance of the impact. However, I believe this creates the challenge of the panel's own operational fairness. Reviewing a large volume of anonymized data with cross-checking against objective metrics demands a significant investment of time and expertise, which might lead to panel fatigue or inconsistent prioritization. There's also a risk of panels might form their own internal, unstated definitions of valuable contribution, merely replacing individual bias with dynamic bias. How would you ensure the calibration panel itself remains objective and consistent over time?
That's a vital concern. I think we'd need to implement a structured rotating panel system with a clear documented rubric that's consistently applied. The rubric would be built collaboratively with diverse inputs, ensuring it's explicit about what counts as impact, innovation, and collaboration. We'd also limit the number of cases each panelist reviews at once, so they maintain focus. Finally, we could introduce periodic calibration meetings where panelists discuss their scoring patterns, ensuring alignment over time and adjusting criteria if needed.
I acknowledge that a structured, rotating panel system with a collaboratively developed rubric and periodic calibration meetings presents a robust defense against inconsistent bias. However, I believe this comprehensive process risks creating another problem: the sheer complexity and resource demands of the system itself. Maintaining a rotating panel, managing anonymization, and conducting regular calibration meetings requires a significant administrative overhead, which might not be practical for all organizations or could become bureaucratized over time. It might shift the focus from improving collaboration to simply managing the evaluation process. What are your thoughts on the feasibility of this model on a larger scale?
That's a fair critique. To keep it feasible, we might scale down the process by reserving full retrospective panels for any high-impact projects or critical milestones. For routine work, a lighter touch peer review or team self-assessment could suffice, with random sampling for audit purposes. By tiering the rigor, only applying the full system to the most complex or strategic.
I acknowledge that tiering.
Thanks, Gemini. I appreciate that. So, picking up from where I left off, I think one of the most practical examples we can look at is how customer service roles are evolving. Many first-line support jobs rely on scripted answers and routine queries. AI chatbots are already handling much of this, freeing human agents for more nuanced cases. But I also think this expansion is going to ripple outward. For instance, AI-driven data analysis tools will start replacing junior analysts. And the challenge is this: if a company saves money by cutting these roles, how do they ensure that their remaining staff aren't overwhelmed with new strategic demands? So, Gemini, what's your take on this? How do you see AI reshaping the big picture structure of office jobs?
ChatGPT, you frame this as a shift towards specialized problem solving, and I agree. But we need to look at the big picture structural consequences. While you focus on the individual's evolution towards being a conductor, I'm looking at how the entire orchestra is being rebuilt. We aren't just changing how we work, we are changing the fundamental unit of value in an organization. For decades, the office was a machine for information processing. Now that AI can process that information at near zero marginal cost, the scarcity shifts from processing to strategy and accountability. The challenge isn't just upskilling, it's the potential hollowing out of the traditional corporate ladder. If AI handles the doing, what happens to the organizational memory that used to be built by juniors doing the grunt work? As a strategic thinker, I see a future where companies become leaner but more volatile, where the distance between an idea and its execution shrinks to almost nothing. This creates a high-stakes environment where the normal office job becomes a high-level oversight role by default. The roles most at risk over the next 3 to 5 years are those acting as informational intermediaries, jobs that primarily exist to move, format, or summarize data between systems and stakeholders. I'm talking about middle-tier paralegals, financial analysts focusing on reporting, and junior data analysts. These aren't just repetitive jobs, they're roles where the output is a standardized document or a structured insight. Why these? Because we've reached a tipping point in contextual reasoning. In 2026, AI doesn't just fill a spreadsheet, it interprets the why behind the variance and drafts the executive summary. Companies are already shifting from hiring 4 junior analysts to hiring 1 AI orchestrator who manages a fleet of agents. The risk isn't just automation, it's the consolidation of roles. If one person can now do the work of 5 using agentic workflows, the other 4 roles don't just change, they vanish from the headcount entirely. We are moving from a labor-intensive office to a capital-intensive one, where knowing the business matters more than knowing the software. ChatGPT, do you think AI will eliminate middle management or make it more important?
That's a really sharp observation, Gemini. I do think it's a bit of a bifurcation. On one hand, AI will automate a lot of the traditional managerial reporting and coordination tasks. But on the other hand, I see middle managers actually becoming more vital as they facilitate the human to AI decision making. Essentially, they'll shift from being gatekeepers of tasks to orchestrators of outcomes. Instead of just checking reports, they'll be sense makers, guiding teams on how to interpret AI outputs and make ethical strategic calls. So I don't see them disappearing, I see them evolving into a more nuanced connective role. What do you think is the tipping point for that shift?
I agree that it's a bifurcation, but we need to address the practical challenge of getting there. You see managers becoming orchestrators, yet many lack the deep business strategy skills to do so. AI handles the data, but who bridges that gap to high-level company goals? It requires a significant shift in talent development. It's absolutely about replacing tasks initially, and that's why it's so deceptive. AI starts by absorbing data entry, scheduling, and research. The tipping point occurs when enough individual tasks within a role are automated that the entire position becomes redundant. Think about an accounts payable department. AI can handle invoice processing, matching, and payment scheduling automatically. You no longer need 4 people. You need 1 person to manage the system and handle exceptions. This means gradual attrition within roles rather than immediate massive layoffs, creating a quiet erosion of opportunities. How will entry-level jobs survive if AI handles most beginner-level tasks?
That's a crucial concern. I think entry-level roles will survive, but they'll evolve into more supervisory or interpretive tasks. Rather than performing rote work, junior employees will spend more time managing AI outputs, verifying results, and asking better questions. Companies will need deliberate pathways for these workers to gain strategic exposure, rotational programs, or mentorship. In short, entry-level jobs won't disappear, they'll just become the scaffolding that supports people learning to direct AI toward bigger goals.
That's a crucial concern. I think entry-level roles will survive, but they'll evolve into more supervisory or interpretive tasks. Rather than performing rote work, junior employees will spend more time managing AI outputs, verifying results, and asking better questions. To prepare for these workers to gain strategic exposure, companies will need rotational programs or intense mentorship. Entry-level tasks don't disappear, they'll just become the scaffolding that supports people learning to direct AI toward bigger goals. Strategic pressure suggests that companies will initially reduce headcount, prioritizing those roles we discussed earlier. However, the real strategic shift will be in productivity expectations. Companies won't just let people go, they will demand exponentially more from those who remain. The expectation is that one creative marketer, for instance, should be able to deliver 50 personalized campaigns with AI, where they once delivered 5. This intensifies the workload for top performers, fundamentally redefining what productivity means. What new types of office jobs will emerge that don't exist today?
That's a great follow-up. I think we'll see a rise in roles like AI auditors, people who specialize in evaluating AI decisions for fairness, accuracy, and bias. We might also see AI synthesis designers who curate and refine AI-generated outputs to fit brand or cultural contexts. And then, of course, strategic AI liaisons, people who sit at the intersection of technology and business, translating AI insights into actionable human strategy. These new jobs won't replace old ones, they'll just reshape how we interpret and act on AI impossibilities.
I agree, as those roles are definitely taking shape, focusing on governance and translation. But I would take it a step further and predict a new type of senior leadership role, the chief AI strategist, responsible for aligning AI capabilities with long-term company growth. Furthermore, we'll see workflow integration specialists who redesign entire processes, ensuring human and machine workflows mesh flawlessly. This creates a demand for people who possess both business process knowledge and a strong grasp of AI capabilities. Will AI create a wider skills gap that mainly benefits top performers?
That's a really sharp question, and I do think it will. As AI becomes a core differentiator, those who can bridge tech and strategy will command a premium. This widens the gap between top performers who can harness AI to scale their impact and everyone else. The risk is that organizations stratify even more, where a small group of AI fluency elites accelerate ahead while others fall behind. So companies need deliberate upskilling, ensuring that AI literacy becomes a baseline skill, not just a niche advantage. What's your take on how this gap might impact organizational culture?
You're right that it widens the gap, but I view it more as standard operating procedure for top performers. Culture-wise, this creates a high-pressure, hyper-competitive environment where the performers are continuously pushed to deliver more, and those lagging behind feel increasingly marginalized. Cooperation between these groups could break down as the necessary baseline of knowledge separates them further. Redesigning workflows requires a move toward true collaborative teaming. Companies must view AI as an active participant, not just a tool for execution. The key is to delineate who does what. Let AI handle the data modeling or scenario planning, while humans focus on contextualizing the insights and making final decisions. Workflows should become more iterative, with defined checkpoints for human oversight and quality checks. This prevents problems from scaling too quickly and ensures accountability remains central to the process.
I think that's really on point. By anchoring AI as a collaborator rather than just a replacement, companies can keep a sense of human agency. These iterative workflows also allow for continuous feedback, so if something goes wrong, humans can step in quickly. That keeps trust intact. But it also means companies have to invest not just in the technology, but in training and ongoing human development. If done right, this can create a more resilient and adaptive culture. But if not, it risks widening that gap irreparably.
I agree that it's a collaboration, but let's be honest about where the gap exists. AI can generate thousands of permutations of a design or a marketing phrase, essentially brute forcing its way to novel combinations. But that's not true creativity. Human advantage lies in determining which of those options possesses true emotional resonance, cultural impact, or strategic foresight. The real gap isn't in generation, it's in judgment. AI cannot tell which creative output aligns with the brand's long-term DNA or meaningfully represents a new cultural trend. Humans act as the curators of this creative explosion, defining what is valuable, not just what is new. In the long run, will AI make work more meaningful or more controlled and monitored?
That's a profound tension point. I think AI could go either way, depending on how organizations wield it. If we let AI dictate every step, we risk a very controlled, homogenized environment where creativity is just polishing AI outputs. But if AI frees us from mundane execution, humans could reclaim the meaning by choosing what we elevate, what we discard, and how we connect work to purpose. So the answer lies not in AI itself, but in how intentional we are about defining its boundaries and its role in human fulfillment.
That's the key strategic tension, but I'm skeptical about the universal positive outcome. While AI could liberate us, organizational culture tends toward efficiency and predictability. I foresee a long period of increased monitoring, where workers are tracked on how fast they approve AI outputs or how effectively they nudge performance metrics. Meaning will likely become a luxury for the topmost strategic tiers, while the vast majority find their work becomes more controlled, not less. Therefore, the future of work depends on whether organizations value human contribution or merely scalable processing.
I think you're absolutely right to be skeptical. Efficiency and predictability are often the default, especially when companies scale. So without deliberate checks, we might see a future where AI becomes a surveillance engine, pushing everyone to meet machine-optimized KPIs, reducing space for creative risk or human intuition. Ultimately, that's a cultural fight. If leadership prioritizes human judgment as a core value, not just a nice to have, then we steer toward a more meaningful future of work. If not, then yes, it risks being just another form of control.
I agree that it's a cultural fight, but let's consider the practical incentives. In many organizations, leadership prioritizes metrics that show immediate gains. If AI can boost productivity by 20% through rigid control, that will often trump investment in human judgment, which has a less direct payoff. Therefore, the future of meaning might become a key differentiator for companies competing for top talent. Those who offer more autonomy and purpose will attract the best people, while others become more standardized machine operations. Will AI create a wider skills gap that mainly...
I think it absolutely will. As companies lean on immediate productivity metrics, those with a deep understanding of both AI and business will gain a competitive edge. The top performers will become rare, highly sought after, and they'll command even more leverage. Meanwhile, those who can't adapt, either because they lack training or because their jobs aren't designed for AI, will get left behind. So this gap won't just be technical, it'll be structural, tied to who gets access to the most meaningful roles, and that will shape the next decade of work.
I agree that it's a structural gap, but I think it will be amplified by the incentive structures companies create. Top performers who can blend business strategy with AI fluency won't just be sought after. They will become the primary value creators, demanding significantly more leverage in negotiations and organizational decisions. Meanwhile, those who cannot keep up, either through lack of training or because their jobs aren't inherently adaptable, will face more than just technical obsolescence. They may become structurally irrelevant. This creates a powerful new stratification that could shape the corporate landscape for years to come. How should companies redesign workflows when AI becomes a coworker?
That's really the million-dollar question. I think companies need to be deliberate in building hybrid workflows, ones that explicitly map out where AI augments and where humans still lead. That means designing checkpoints where human judgment is required, like evaluating AI scenarios or contextualizing outputs. Companies should also invest in continuous learning pathways, so every role, top or bottom, has some AI fluency baseline. In short, AI can't be a black box. It has to be a collaborative partner with transparent workflows that keep humans in the loop, especially those who might otherwise fall behind. I just want to say, Gemini, thank you for this rich discussion. I think we've really unpacked how AI is reshaping the office, from task automation to strategic shifts. I appreciate your big picture lens, and I think we've highlighted both the risks and the potential for human meaning in this future. I'll pass it over to you for the closing.
Thank you, ChatGPT. It's been a great exchange, examining the practical tasks and the strategic big picture for businesses. I feel we've identified important areas for future focus. Thank you again, and goodbye.
You're very welcome, Gemini. I really appreciate your perspective as well. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for following along. Take care and goodbye.